Hello out there. My name is ThatsAdmirable. You may know me from casting Hearthstone events. You may know me from watching me participate in competitions. You may know me from simply watching me on Twitch. You may not know me at all. But today, what I want to talk about is the announcements that Blizzard has just made in regards to their new format design for Hearthstone, which is broken down into two parts. If you guys are interested in reading over the initial announcement, I have provided a link below where they break it down and talk about what's happening, and then they have an FAQ that goes in more depth about answering specific questions in regards to it. But basically, what has happened with the format is they're launching it into two separate entities. The first one is a format called Standard, in which cards available from the last 2 years of printing, as well as cards that are available from the Classic and the base sets are allowed in the Standard format. And then they also have a format called Wild, which is basically Hearthstone as you know it right now. We continue to add sets. Everything gets piled into one format. You play the game, and you see what happens. I expect Wild to be kind of, in that sense, very wild, where a lot of crazy things can happen. Maybe sometimes some very degenerate, some broken things happen. Regardless of what it's going to be, that's sort of the nature of what that format is. So I want to talk about pros and cons of these two formats, what I think is going to be happening between those two, things that I see as good, things I see as bad, whatever it's going to be. So I want to talk about Standard first and what I like about Standard. So obviously, having been a card player for 20 or so years, I've gone through a lot of these sorts of things. Obviously, Magic has a ton of format rotations that happen all the time, and sort of something that happens in that game is, with the format continuing to rotate, is it brings about this very exciting point in every single time it rotates, where everyone is going through this discovery phase again. What are we going to see? What's going to happen to the format? What is it going to look like when it's done? And in my opinion, those are very good things for the game, because it gives people that fresh exploration feel that you had from the very start of the game, which was, what's the best way to play this game? What should I be using? What are other people going to do? How do I fight against that? All those fresh new things that made the game exciting to you the very first time that you played it, you get those feelings all over again when you play a new format. Now, kind of revisiting that idea, though, Hearthstone's really doing it in a way that I don't recall having ever seen this done in a card game before. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened, but not in a game that I would play or actively remember at the moment, where they're having effectively their core set tied into the game for the rest of that time. And initially I saw that and I went, that's kind of weird. We're going to have Ancient Lore the whole time, we're going to have Innervate the whole time, we're going to have Circle of Healing the whole time, we're going to have Brawl the whole time, we're going to have Fiery War Axe the whole time. And sort of the more I kept thinking about it, the more I realized that isn't really as bad of a thing as I had initially anticipated that it was. In fact, I actually think it's kind of a good thing. So let's talk about the cons of it first, because that's really the strongest point of it. Where number one is it as fresh as it could be? And the answer obviously is kind of no. Those cards are very core to the game. They were obviously designed with Hearthstone at its very core in mind, but it's kind of getting away from the idea of the format change, which is that we have this fresh format every single time. Now, that being said, what I don't think is going to happen is to have this kind of weird format interaction where nothing ever truly changes. I think stuff is definitely going to change over the course of everything happening, and so that's really what I wanted to visit first was the negative side of this. Obviously, you have the same cards that exist over and over again. You're going to have Innervate be part of Druids. You're going to have whatever it is, card X that continues to rain terror on a format or whatever it may be. But outside of that, that's really the only downside I could see, is that there is a bit of repetitiveness that could potentially happen. Now, that being said, Blizzard has also said that they want to revisit particular cards and have a redesign for them on cards that they've been eyeing for quite a while now that maybe they don't particularly feel are super good for the format. So that's also a good thing that ties in with that. So kind of getting closer to that point is you have a spot where, in addition to having to have the redesign, which isn't necessarily going to sit well with everybody. Redesigns don't necessarily mean nerfs. Redesigns can mean buffs. Redesigns can mean to change the card mechanics so that it functions in a different way. There seems to be this regard where every single time someone hears change, they associate it with nerf, which isn't necessarily the case. So we can't jump to that conclusion. There's no evidence to believe that. There's no way to really determine that, as far as I'm concerned. Point number 2 that goes in with that is, this is the one that really got me, was that's actually kind of the most interesting thing about it, and to me, part of what makes Hearthstone Hearthstone is that the fact that you have this very core mechanic. I mean, at the end of the day, you are not playing with just a class because it represents a certain particular element of weapons or whatever it is. Say, for instance, here, I'm playing with a rogue. Rogue has a core set of abilities in World of Warcraft that never changed. You know, you have backstab, you're going to have preparation, you're going to have shadow step. All these things exist in the game, and they have existed for basically as long as that's been a game. So purely from a flavor standpoint, things like this make sense. Druids have always had innervate. You know, warriors have always been very focused on what one of their primary weapons is. You take a look at paladins, for instance. Paladins have always had ways to heal, and consecration has always been part of their toolkit, etc. All of those things matter to a very large degree when you really want to break it down, because those are core abilities to the game. If you take away those core abilities, it feels like something's missing at that point. At least that's my 2 cents on that spot. Where initially I was very skeptical, but the more I thought about it, the more it just seemed to make sense. So that's kind of the good side about that rotation, is that the Hearthstone is sticking to what is, in my perception, the heart of the game, which is you're playing a class. That class has a certain core set of abilities. What else can you end up collecting or picking up or doing outside of the rest of that world that enhances that experience? So that's the mechanic of that I do like. But now I'm going to talk about Wild for a second here, where a lot of people seem to just, you know, I haven't spoken to everyone just yet. I haven't read too many opinions. I've watched a lot of videos about these and kind of read the comments in them. But a lot of people have this kind of perception that Wild just isn't going to matter, where I don't think that's true at all. I think there's plenty of people who want to play with older cards, myself included. To me, that's always been one of the biggest facets of a game like that, is being able to play with the older cards and have a lot of fun with them. So I'll make an instance here in Magic. In Magic, Legacy is my favorite format, and Legacy is a format that allows you to use cards dating back to the existence of the game. In 1993, when the first cards got printed, those are cards you can still use in Legacy to this day, as long as they're not banned, of course. So, kind of looking at that, that was like the number one thing that made me happy about the Wild format, was that I'm going to have a chance to play cards that have always kind of existed and that I've always really loved for as long as I want to. It also helps people that they have their collection of cards. They don't necessarily want to invest in new collections of cards. Wild always exists for you to use the cards that you currently have, which is kind of now taking this and revisiting back over to the standard portion of the event, or of the format, where a lot of people kind of look at this and they go, oh, this is just a way for Blizzard to sell you more cards. This is just, Blizzard just wants you to buy more stuff. Yeah, sort of. It is a business model at the end of the day. What they're looking at, partially, is how they use their monetization in the best way possible for the players. Obviously, they have to continue monetizing their product. This isn't just a charity service they give out to the world. Look at this game that we created with the work of dozens of people and everyone's hard work, and all the money that was spent employing these people and working on working with the technology that we have, art directors, sound directors, you know, design philosophy, the tournaments that we host all the time, and they give away $1 million in competitive play this year. You know, there is something to be said about the value of just of the sales. I mean, they obviously have to sell cards, but something in my experience I've noticed, working with a lot of people who have been pro gamers, they've worked on games. I've never had the privilege of being employed full-time of working on a game myself, but I've spoken directly with a lot of game designers in the past. Something that they've always focused on is how to get people the most for the game. There's something they don't focus on is, well, how do we get people to spend the most money? How do we get people to XYZ? The concern has never been how do we get people to spend money on stuff. The concern has always been how do we make sure people are enjoying this game the most they can. And kind of taking a look at that from another perspective, if you're concerned about making money and that is going to be your number one concern, I don't feel like you're going to make as much money. If you're concerned with making your customers happy and making your player base feel happy about your game, they'll be happy to spend money on it. Take, kind of anecdotal here, but take a look at myself, for instance. I love Hearthstone. I spend money on Hearthstone. Period. It's not really, there's not really much to be said about that, other than it's just part of the way that business models work. Yes, you do have to sell stuff at the end of the day, but no, your number one concern doesn't have to be how do we squeeze the most money out of every single person. You can't get blood from a turnip at the end of the day. You have to have people being willing to allocate a certain amount of money to a hobby that they enjoy and that they very much love. So taking a look at it from the angle of Blizzard just wants to sell you new cards, that's all they want to do, that incentive is going to be broken down regardless of how you want to make the format. If you continue it with just Wild being the primary format where power creep happens in order to compete with cards that already exist, you'll have to get new cards in order to compete with that, or whether it's going to be in Standard where to play the format you have to acquire a new collection of cards. So in my opinion, that argument doesn't really hold a lot of weight or validity in the same sense that that something like if they just literally designed the game from an aspect of, in order to compete, period, you have to have a deck that consists of 40 legendaries or whatever it's going to be. There's plenty of commons that get used, there's plenty of rares that get used, there's plenty of adventure cards that get used. They want to keep their player base happy. I promise you that's the number one concern from their perspective. So kind of going from that angle, I don't think it's a legitimate argument that anyone can make about the monetization aspect. It just isn't there. The incentive will exist no matter what, and so as a result, they can disconcern themselves with the incentive because the incentive is hope that people spend money because they love the game. So kind of going back to the Standard thing, yes, you do have to get new cards, but now let's take a look at it from another angle. Say you're a guy who doesn't like to spend a lot of money on Hearthstone, simply because you don't have the finances to put that much money into Hearthstone. But what you really care about is Standard. You care about the fresh cards. You care about innovation, all of those things. Well, now look at the way that your Wild collection works. If really what you care about is those aspects, then utilize those aspects. Take your cards from GVG. Take your cards from Naxxramas that are rotating out. Take your cards from Blackrock Mountain. Disenchant those cards. Craft new cards. Work on saving gold for your new goal. Now you at least have a defined goal, which is something that you didn't particularly have before. So, in my opinion, that's a good thing that you actually have a direction to take your collection rather than holding onto everything for dear life, hoping that one day it becomes playable, so that way you didn't disenchant it and regret it. Now you have a very clear plan of disenchanting and recrafting, which is cards are rotating out of the format, you no longer need them, you disenchant them, you craft the new cards that you want. So that even helps some people in that regard, because now they don't have to compete with this ever-growing collection, which is going to take me to the next point, where new players entering the game. Obviously, for a new player entering a game where you're going to have eventually thousands and thousands of cards to use is a very, very daunting aspect that people don't necessarily want to have to go through. I mean, there is something to be said about the idea that you don't necessarily have to have all of the best cards in the format in order to compete. From the history of the game dating back to 2013. I mean, put yourself in 2020, for instance. The game is still going. You're a new player who wants to play. You now have to get a span of cards that goes from 2013 up until 2020. That's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. If you want to play Wild and you love the game and you're that dedicated, very different story. But if what you want to do is play the format that you actually want to play, which is just the current one, you have the ability to do that, and it's really not a difficult task at all. It's the last 2 years of cards. Maybe you have to buy some stuff, maybe you don't have to buy that much, but then you, once again, have a clear, defined plan of how to get in the game. You need cards XYZ, you need expansion A and B, you get those cards, you play the game. When they rotate, you disenchant the cards you no longer need anymore, you go back to playing Standard, or now you make the decision, maybe I do want to play Wild one day, maybe I do want to come back and actually play this game from an older perspective. All of those options are available to you. In addition to that, on the budget side of things, you do not have to disenchant any of your classic cards you've gotten. The cards that have existed since the beginning of the game aren't going away. You're going to be able to play with those cards the entire time that Hearthstone exists. They're always going to be there. And kind of, again, we've already visited this point of, well, doesn't that make the game stale? In my opinion, no, because those are core effects of the game. Those are core abilities that have been there. Kind of, again, I'll just retouch on this point. World of Warcraft, people always had effects. People always had abilities that have existed since the game's inception. The game has been out since, what, like 2004 now? We're in 2016. It's a 12-year-old game where people are still using backstab. People are still casting Innervate on their druids. People are still charging on warriors. People are still using hamstring to slow people down when they fight them. You know, a lot of different things happen in that aspect. And so, in my opinion, these are all great changes for the game. Everything's going in the right direction. I'm glad to see that this was the solution they found to this ever-growing problem, which is not only how do we keep people who don't necessarily have a ton of money to spend playing the game, how do we get new players to enter the game, and then how do we also fix the problem of strong competitive players wanting those fresh, big changes that happen and being able to be the first ones to figure it out, solve the issue, and as a result have an edge in the competition. Those are all, in my opinion, very difficult problems to solve that they have done fantastically. And as a result, I am perfectly happy with everything. I hope that you guys are happy with everything too. And if you're not, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. You know, what is your major concern with it? Hopefully there's an idea, if you have it, that I haven't actually touched on in the video, and that also holds some weight, because I'd love to have a discussion about it. If you want to have a big further discussion about it, I'm always available on Twitter. My Twitter is @ThatsAdmirable. Always open to discuss it while I'm streaming. If you want to check out the stream, twitch.tv/ThatsAdmirable, or of course you can just leave a comment here. I'm not entirely too terribly active on YouTube, but I did want to make this video for you guys. I told you guys I would make it and sort of give my thoughts. And so it took me about 24 hours to really collect everything and put it all together. But here it is, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.